My Lords, I speak today from the perspective of a retired male lawyer, pale and perhaps a little stale. I shall look at where we have come from, where we have got to today, because history is important. I start with the Matrimonial Causes Act, 1857. Under this, men, for the first time, could petition the court for a divorce on the basis of their wife's adultery. But a wife wanting to divorce her husband had to prove not just his adultery, but an aggravating factor such as rape or incest. That imbalance continued until the Matrimonial Causes Act 1923, which put husbands and wives on an equal footing, each now able to divorce the other on the grounds of simple adultery. Women's property rights had picked up, that is, for those who had some property, when in 1882 the Married Women's Property Act allowed married women to own and control property in their own right for the first time. That was, for some at least, a big step forward. Let me turn to suffrage. Things kicked off in the late 1880s when a woman who fulfilled the necessary property qualifications was permitted to vote in the new London County Council elections. I have a particular interest in this. My great-great-grandmother, the first Lady Sandhurst, by then a widow, questioned why, if she could vote, she could not be a candidate. So, in 1889, she stood in the London County Council elections, in the Liberal interest, I fear, in the Brixton seat. She won. She won the popular vote. But her defeated and cross Conservative opponent challenged her election in the courts. He argued that while the statute gave her the right to vote, it only spoke of men as elected members. That argument succeeded, and she was disqualified. She was not deterred. In 1890, she was elected president of the Society for Promoting the Return of Women as County Councillors. She would have been very proud of my aunt, her great-granddaughter, who became a county councillor and later chairman of Oxfordshire County Council. While the right to vote in general elections was given to women, as we all know, after the First World War, of course there was still discrimination against women because they could not vote until they attained the age of 30. Only in 1928 was that limitation removed. At much the same time, in 1921, we had the Sex Disqualification Removal Act. This enabled women to read for the bar. Helena Florence Normanton was the first woman to take advantage of that act and to join an Inn of Court. In November 1922, she was the second woman to be called to the bar of England and Wales, following the example of Ivy Williams in May 1922. Progress for the women at first was slow, but after the war it got a bit better. In 1949, Normanton and Rose Heilbronn both took silk. The next year, in 1950, Elizabeth Lane took silk. Lane was to be appointed the first woman county court judge in 1962, and 3 years later was appointed the first woman in the family division of the High Court. I appeared quite often before her, and she was a jolly good judge. Now we have women judges at all levels, at the very highest levels too, even if they're still outnumbered by men. Turning to a personal level now, when I joined my chambers of, I think, 15 or 16 men in 1973, it had no women members. There were by now, of course, growing numbers of women at the bar. A contemporary of mine was Heather Hallett, now Baroness Hallett. Women undoubtedly, as Baroness Kennedy will know, needed grit and luck to start at the bar, then even more than the men, much more. In 1977, we selected the first woman member of my chambers. The initial discussions, I recall well. They revolved really around two things. One, the lavatory facilities, and two, would she leave to have children? But we overcame that barrier, and thereafter, at least in my chambers, a candidate's sex was never an issue. We recruited many more women, although I acknowledge that I cannot say the same throughout the bar. We also learned, in my chambers, to treat women with respect, not to expect them to join in and enjoy so-called banter. Happily, as I speak today, my old chambers currently has 6 women's QCs, Queen's Counsel, and a substantial number of women members. 2 former women members now sit on the High Court bench, and one of them, Philippa Whipple, will this afternoon be sworn in as a Lady Justice of Appeal. So we make progress. We have come a long way. But when I look at the wider world, there is still much to be done. Childcare is hugely expensive. In most, if not all families, the burden of running the home still falls more heavily on women. I know, I have a working daughter. The large numbers of women graduates and the growth of working from home will perhaps see the balance change over time and male partners take a greater share. I certainly hope so. But to my mind, as we've heard from others today, even more serious than opportunities at work are the incidents of daily life that women have to put up with. Yesterday's news, the business pages of the BBC News on the web, saw as the lead item that Lloyd's of London had fined a member firm £1 million. It had fined them because Atrium underwriters had admitted charges relating to bullying and misconduct during annual boys' nights out. These included initiation games, heavy drinking, and the making of inappropriate and sexualized comments about female colleagues. That was yesterday. So we men have much to learn. We must all do better, but the worst part of this laddish culture is that the disrespect for women, as we have heard, and the plain misogyny at its heart, is not just unpleasant for women and demeaning, but it leads to violence. This is not getting better. I looked at the figures for London crime. In 2010-11, there were some 3,300 rape offences recorded. 10 years later, 2019-20, that figure had more than doubled to 7,890. And as we all know, only too well, women are afraid to walk home at night alone. I could go on. Very simply, until we men, and I'm not perfect myself, all treat all women with respect and decency, these numbers will not improve. More generally, too many women are demeaned. And that is why, for my part, I'm very sorry to see the pressure from some in the transgender debate. In arguing for rights, some advocates pour scorn on women who wish to preserve privacy and personal modesty. Women should not have to give up hard-won rights before they've even got true, effective equality with men. We have come a long way, but we have a long way still to go. We can and must do better. Women must not come second. Thank you.